So, welcome everybody. I just want to first acknowledge Dr. Ali and Nuri Stillman. Thank you for sponsoring today's learning in memory of your mother, Pearl, whose yard site is tonight and tomorrow. Tomorrow night. Monday night, Tuesday. But in the coming year, it's going to be
future yard site
next year is going to be today. So you're you're getting in early.
Yeah.
You're getting in early, and today, Hey Av is the yard site of the Ari HaKadosh, the most famous Kabbalist, definitely of the last 1,000 years. So I also want to welcome, we have a special guest from Englewood, Chagai Batsri, who's maybe at some point I'll ask you to share something about the Arizal. Maybe when we're going to read a little bit of the Eitz Chaim today as well as part of the learning. So maybe you'll help with that if you're up to. No pressure at all. So first of all, I'm going to try to cover this 7 things. One is the background of the Arizal, his teachers. The second is Tzfat at the time of the Arizal. And the third is the outline of his teachings. The fourth is we're going to read Eitz Chaim, the first little bit of Eitz Chaim. The fifth are a little bit about customs. So we'll share a little section from pre-Eitz Chaim. And number 6 is science and Arizal. Number 7 is psychology and Arizal. Now, let me tell you, we're not going to do, there's a lot here, so there's, and number 8, yeah, all in an hour. And number 8, and I'm going to actually start with number 8, because you'll see why, is how the Arizal's teachings became written down. And I'll actually start with that because that's not my area. It's really a lecture in and of itself that we're going to have in the coming year from Dr. Stillman's son, Avinoam Stillman, who's now is a professor starting to work, I believe, in November at which
University of Vienna.
University of Vienna, which is in my family. We have a connection to Vienna. The Kalbachs were in Baden and at one of the suburbs of Vienna before the war. So one of the things that, or maybe the thing that your son got his PhD in is the transmission of the Arizal. I believe it's in a particular person who did a lot of recensions, a lot of the rewriting and editing, a man named Rabbi Meir Poppers. And he was a student of Rabbi Yaakov Tzemach, who was one of the main people who wrote down, obviously everyone knows Rabbi Chaim Vital. Rabbi Chaim Vital is the most well-regarded student of the Arizal. His son Shmuel as well continued his writing. But then there's a whole mystery of who wrote what and when. In fact, I remember when I first learned about it, they said that he buried somebody buried his writing, Reb Chaim Vital, or one of the people who wrote buried it, and then someone in the next generation had a dream that the rabbi who said forbade it to be published came and undid the vow. What does that mean? Yeah, in the dream. What does that mean? Whether the story is true, what it means is that the transmission was fraught with a lot of danger, because anytime you write down Kabbalah, there's already a Gemara that talks about the idea of not revealing certain things, certain secrets. So too with the Arizal. But the bottom line is, this is a lecture that will be given by your son in due time. So I'm not going to belabor things that are not my area, and that I wish he was here today, or that we could have set up a proper Zoom where we could see him, but we'll do that another time. So back to, but he basically will eventually show us through the lens of one of the particular people, how it was not just written, but also how it was transmitted from Tzfat to Jerusalem to Europe, and didn't just stay local, so to speak. So let's go to the background of the Arizal and his teachers. The Arizal was born in 1534, and he passed away in 1572. Today's date, it would be July 25th in the secular calendar. And he was born in Jerusalem, but he was orphaned. His father passed away when he was young, and he was raised with the help of his uncle, who was his uncle from his mother's side, who was a tax collector in Egypt, and he was very wealthy. And I believe he married this man's daughter, his cousin, if I'm not mistaken, eventually. And he was introduced to two fantastic teachers. One of them was known as the Radvaz, Reb David Abu Zimra, who was a scholar who they say lived to be, I think, 94 years old. He was the chief rabbi of Egypt at the time. He had everything. He was a wealthy, successful businessman. He was a posek. He wrote over 3,000 responsa to inquiries, to questions. And he was also a Kabbalist. In fact, I had one of his farm. Of course, I don't know where it is anymore, but it's on the 613 mitzvot. And I could tell you that it's not in the style of the Arizal, meaning if you're going to look and see where did the Arizal get his new ideas, you're probably not going to find it there. But you'll still see very solid scholarship of Kabbalah, and what's interesting is this incorporation of Torah as a whole. And then the second teacher of the Arizal was Rabbi Betzalel Ashkenazi, better known as the Shita Mekubetzet, who was a brilliant organizer and writer who was able to go through sections of the Talmud and take the Rishonim and write out like a rewritten work of existing ideas that were already out there, but he was able to reformulate it. And a lot of times that's the best, like could be your best teacher to introduce you to a thorough analysis of a Talmudic reading based on what was available then, still popular today. Now, he was also a Kabbalist, and he also was a student himself earlier of the Radvaz, who I said lived to a ripe old age of 94 years old. And what they have in common is this idea of like systematic analysis of various opinions and various texts. The third teacher he had was a copy of the Zohar, not a full copy, but some part of the Zohar that he read and reread and reread. The fourth teacher was different. He channeled different, according to legend. He would go and visit. If you learn the Zohar describes the different hechalot, the yeshivot in heaven. And they're different, just like today we have different yeshivot. We have the Mir, we have the Yeshivat HaMukabalim, you have the Vision Hitzit, right? There's also, in heaven, there's different yeshivot. And then it's described vividly in the Zohar. So he would channel into these kind of mystical places. That's a tradition. And he would, learn there. How did he do that? Is he spent many, many years in relative isolation, meditating by the banks, meditating by the banks of the Nile. He would only go home for Shabbos. and which was not unheard of. The difference, by the way, one of the differences when they say what's Hasidus versus Kabbalah in terms of how they both, some Hasidic groups study Kabbalah, not all, or some version of it. So what's the difference? So they say the difference is, for example, that the Kabbalists, for them, going into isolation, that was the goal. That was like, if you had to speak to people, okay, you had to, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to be in isolation, hisbodedut. And by Hasidim, they dropped that a little bit. Maybe Breslov, they go and yell in the woods a little bit, but other than that, it's not such a thing by Hasidim to try to isolate themselves. So that's, he followed that path. Okay, so that's a little bit of his teachers. Then, let's go to number 2. Tzfat at the time of the Arizal was dominated by Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who we have in the shul 2 of his works. We have the Pardes Rimonim. It's downstairs because it was Yartzeit was 2 weeks ago. And if you look at the shelf, where is it here? No, it's not here. I think it's on the bottom over there. It's a multi-volume work called the Or Yakar. Do you see it? Dr. Stillman is on the bottom, maybe. It's a big red. I don't know why. Where is it? No, that's not it. Okay. I don't know what happened to it. It's hard to walk away because it's a big set. If we get it, oh, here it is. Here. Do show and tell. It's like a 12-volume set. It's hard to get. It's out of print. I have no idea why. And they never bothered making the pages of the dafim of the Zohar to match up with the dafim that we have, so it makes it hard to look things up. But that is Rabbi Moshe Cordovero's commentary on the Zohar, whatever is in existence. And basically, if you have a familiarity with Gemara, I'd say the closest parallel to what you might know is it's like Tosafot. Tosafot, unlike Rashi, who just tries to explain what's right in front of you, asks questions from other sources in the Talmud and tries to reconcile. And in that, you could say, are already the seeds of like what they like to call on the internet conceptual thinking. Like the idea rather than just this statement, what's behind it? What's behind the Talmud saying this? Because we have to reconcile it with an apparent contradiction. So he does the same thing in asking a series of questions on any given text from other seemingly contradictory texts. And in the answer, he's beginning to develop conceptual thinking of the Zohar. Now, here's what might be argued from scholars. There's 2 ways to learn the Zohar. One is that it's like a stream of consciousness of the Rashbi. It's just like, I don't want to call it prophecy, but like things are just coming in, and he's sitting with his friends, they're going on the road, and he's just teaching as it comes in. That's one way of doing it. The other way is there was a bunch of very well-disciplined writers who had a whole conceptual framework of understanding Torah, and they reframed it into the story. But they knew all along the Seder Hishtalshalut, so to speak, a version of how to view the world in its spiritual underpinning, so to speak. So either he's creating, according to the first version, people like the Ramak, he's not the only one, he's creating the conceptual understanding of the Zohar, but according to the second version, it was already there, he's just revealing it. Okay? This, I think, is the biggest influence on the Ari, not necessarily the Ramak himself. The creative framework that the Ramak created in the city of Tzfat. I don't believe the Arizal would have just given that over somewhere in Egypt. They didn't have the right soil, so to speak. They didn't have the right people there to hear it. You need, every Rebbe needs a Talmud. And he actually says this, he says, I came here for you, for Chaim Vital. That he was like, that was the reason why he came to Tzfat. Meaning what? Whether you believe that or not, what you should believe is that the Kitvei Ari would not have happened with people like Reb Chaim Vital not having been there. Okay, so it's the Chavra, so to speak, the Chavraya Kadisha, the disciples of the Ari who already had. Who did they know all this Kabbalah from? They knew it from Moshe Cordovero because he was the head of the Kabbalists, and there was an overlap of a few months between the passing of Moshe Cordovero and whether he sat in on one lesson or 5 lessons. That I don't know, but they say that he came to Tzfat because he had gotten a copy of the Pardes Rimonim. So he already was familiar with Rav Moshe Cordovero's work, and then he came into contact with Rav Moshe Cordovero's circle, so to speak, which eventually, after the passing of Rav Moshe Cordovero, they say that he saw the pillar of smoke. That's exactly where he was going to be buried, which was a sign that he was going to be the next leader of the Mukabalim. So that's a little bit about the Tzfat at the time of the Arizal. There's a lot there. If you're interested in more details, there's a guy, Lawrence Fine, a professor, fine man. We had him like twice for the Day of Kabbalah. You could read it. He describes kind of what some of the other personalities in Tzfat and how they made a living and why Tzfat became predominant and the rivalry between Tzfat and Jerusalem over reinstating the smicha. There was a lot of vitality in the religious circles. Of course, in the secular world, they all say it had to do with the exile from Spain, that it was still, 1492 was not just a year, it was the beginning of, 100 years of this expulsion continued, and then they extended the Inquisition into other countries. So this is a still ongoing thing that still was very much real for the people there. So a lot of the modern day scholarship want to say, well, the Arizal is a reaction to the expulsion and stuff like that. Okay.
Naftali, how
Yeah.
do you place the Beit Yosef here?
So the Beit Yosef is this senior rabbinic presence who gave a lot of gravitas. He already had written the Rabbi Yosef Kar. He had already written his magnum opus. We think his magnum opus is the Shulchan Aruch. He would have argued and said that the Beis Yosef, which is the Shulchan Aruch, is only like a cliff notes of the Beis Yosef, is his magnum opus. He had already written that by then, and the funny thing is that he was many years older and much more known at that time, and he came to learn by the Ari.
Came to learn by who?
And by the Arizal, he came to learn Kabbalah. He recognized that the Arizal was the greatest.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reality.
That's a reality. That's a reality. They say that the Arizal said his neshama, even though he was a Kabbalist also, they said that the Arizal said, your neshama is in the revealed part of Torah. That's where you're going to be recognized, which is totally true. Whatever little bit of Kabbalah we have from Rabbi Yosef Karo is not really known. There's a famous little story about Shavuos night with a Maggid, that he had a mystical teacher that would speak through his throat. Louis Jacobs translates it. It's worth the read.
Beit Yosef's influence was really universal.
The Beit Yosef, look,
As a Kabbalist also.
as number 5, which is about customs and halachic codifiers, I have like the only person who had as much influence on halacha as the Beit Yosef was the Arizal, who had his equal influence on customs, and we'll get to that. I'll tell you why. I know we'll give me a minute. Okay, so that's a little bit about Tzfat. There's a lot. Tzfat is an amazing collection. You mentioned somebody, right? But there was also the Al Shach HaKadosh was another person who wanted to study with. There was each one of these people are a Gadol Hadar, and from another time. So the Gadol Hadar, not just for then, but also for now. So these are massive people who would have an influence well beyond the time that they lived in. Okay, so now he already was coming onto the scene to well-developed Kabbalists who didn't just study, but they also lived. Tzfat was like a magical city. The way it is now, like it's kind of like you go to the Kvarim. Then they also had Kvarim of Tanoim and other great people. And part of the work of the Arizal was revealing a Piruch HaKodesh where these Kvarim is. There might have also been some Misorah. It didn't have to be necessarily just like, I just feel it's here. There could have been people who said, well, it's either here or there. And that Arizal said it's here. And that was already, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero already had a practice of going to Kivrei Tzadikim and channeling, so to speak, things from, there's an idea that if you say over the teachings of Tana and Amora, Sos Vasosav, their lips are repeating or reciting together with you what they're saying. So imagine if you also go to the kever. So in this well thought out group of people that he reassembled and recreated, because it wasn't just like a smooth transition with the students of the Ramak just saying, now we have that Arizal, we're all going to go to him. You'll read some accounts that kind of make it sound like that, but that's a very simplified version. That's not what actually happened. For example, it took a number of months for Rabbi Chaim Vital to become a student. And what was the reason? Because Rabbi Chaim Vital was already an established Kabbalist. I believe he might have already written some Svarim. And he thought in his own head, like many rabbis do, I know I'm a greater Kabbalist than the Arizal, so why should I go to him? He was younger, like there was no reason, I don't know if he was younger, but he wasn't old per se, and he wasn't really well known yet. So he waited, and there's some, again, legend type of story that then he went, and then he didn't even understand what the Arizal was talking about. So the Arizal took him on a little boat into the Kinneret, and then he said, I want you to drink the water here. Let's get some water. He says, why? Why should we drink the water? He says, this is from the Be'er Shel Miriam. I know Mark is having trouble with this. I thought my eyes were...
It's always good to have a subject.
Yeah. So that's what happened.
Contact's trying to save me also. So.
Yeah.
Now we have two people.
Yeah, but we know only the water is going to help you.
You know exactly the place.
Yeah. So, and after that, he understood the Arizal. So the thing is that the Arizal taught what was already taught. He taught an outline of what we call the Seder Hishtalshalut, which means how do we get from one God, and we already talked about those who were here when we talked about Moshe Cordovero, which is the problem you have is once you have one God, how do you then have many things that exist? And there's a few problems with that from the perspective of does the knowledge that God have of everything that's occurring create any multiplicity, so to speak, in God? Because even God knowing something now that he didn't know before would indicate that there's a change in God. Now, this is our philosophical questions that were raised already by Platonic and Neoplatonic thought. So they're nothing new. And these are things that the Rambam was challenged by. The Rambam had, so Rabbi Moshe Cordovero actually quotes the Rambam, we talked about that, in Mor Nevuchim, to kind of borrow some of the ideas of how to get away with not creating multiplicity or change in any way in what I'm going to call the Godhead. I don't even know what that means. It just means some place that there is no real changes, and then we come up with the sefirot, the 10 sefirot, and the olamot, the chain of worlds that basically span from the beginning of what we would call a spiritual emanation until eventually there would be the creation of what we call the 6 days of creation that we are now in terms of actual existence. So there's a couple things here. The first is that this widely credited concept of the Tzimtzum. We don't really find it in the Ramak. If it's in the Zohar, it's kind of not really clear that that's what it means. You could always reread it accordingly. But this idea that in the beginning, in order for God to create the world, God had to withdraw his light to the side. And into that place where God's light was not present or was concealed, he drew a narrow ray of light into that and began to create the spiritual worlds. Okay, so that's the first thing. It's called Tzimtzum. The second thing is that there are all of these olamot, there's all of these worlds that precede our world. Okay? And the Arizal is going to introduce various constructs to help us understand how these worlds came into being. Okay. So instead of talking about it, what I'm going to do is, who here reads Hebrew? If you don't read Hebrew, please don't take this, because you're wasting your time. Take one and pass it down. This is we're going to read it from Eitz Chaim of the Arizal. Okay, we're starting on page 1. So we're going to start with Hashar Harishon, the first gate. Okay. Now, even if you could take one, even. Okay. Be'inyan tachlis hakavan drushi gulam v'yosher b'chamisha anafim. This is a lecture about igulim v'yosher, the circular and the linear. So Anaf Aleph, the first branch. When it comes to the matter of the purpose of creation, we're going to have two queries. The first inquiry that was already looked into and analyzed, L'das sibas briyat olamot. This is to help us understand the purpose of the creation of the worlds. There was already a conversation about this. I'm not the first, Arizal says. There was a conversation, and this is what the consensus is. The Gazer Omer, Kisibas Adavar Haya, Lefish Hina Hu Yisbareach, Muchach Shia Shalem B'chol Pulotav V'Kochotav. That the Blessed One must be whole or complete in all of his actions and all of his abilities. And all of his names of greatness and elevation and honor. And if these would not come out, so to speak, into actuality, he could not be called, so to speak, we don't want to say that even, be called whole or complete. Not in his activities, not in his names, not in his kinoi is like an associative name because of some attribute he manifests. We have the great name of God. It's known as the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 4-letter name of God. Tetragrammaton, it's called. It sounds like one of the Transformers in the movie that's been named after it, right? Nikr Kein al Horas Havayotov and Nitzchit B'Kimalad. Why? What does the 4-letter name represent? It represents God's eternalness, that He's forever. Why is that? Haya Hova B'Yeh. He was, He is, and He will be. before existence as we know it, during the time of existence as we are, and even if the world no longer exists as we know it, he'll continue to exist. Let me just say something to you. There's a general understanding that after the Arizal, all the Kabbalists that follow him follow his ideas. You ever hear that? I'm sure the Chazan and Dr. Stillman are well aware of that. But it's just not true. You know? they found that there's other Kabbalah Kabbalah teachers that are quoted even after the Arizal, including when they don't necessarily agree with the Arizal. And here I'm going to tell you something. There's the greatest kind of Kabbalah scholar, if you can say this, of the 7 Chabad Rebbeim. You're not really supposed to say this because they would say, "What do you mean? It's they're all the greatest, or the last one was the greatest, the first one was the greatest." But
you want to turn off the tape for a minute?
no, I'm going to say it. The 5th one was the greatest. The 5th one, the Rebbe Rashab, Shalom Ber of Lubavitch. In terms, I'm not saying the greatest in having conversations with God. I'm talking about in his writings, you could see very clearly that he had a gift of explaining Kabbalah very clearly. Maybe the other ones understood it better, but they didn't explain it as well. The Alter Rebbe, he's great. The Tzemach Tzedek, amazing. The Rebbe, he's the Rebbe of our generation, so you have to pay attention to every one of them in a different way. But the Rashab has a mimer, and his 2 greatest years are Tafresh Samach Vav and Tafresh Ayin Beis. They're both a little bit over 100 years ago. And the beginning of the Hemshech Tafresh Samach Vav, he would teach the same subject for a year or 2 or 3. That's what type of teacher. Imagine you come to shul and they're like, "Where's Rabbi Citron holding in the Hemshech?" He's 7 months into this thing. That was how the Rashab would teach. So it's a whole nother level. And in Tafresh Samach Vav, he taught a mimer, a hemshech, but he began with an argument on this teaching. That's the beginning of the whole hemshech. Was I don't agree with the Arizal. It's not just the Arizal, by the way. The Arizal said many people already had this conversation, and nimna v'gamer. It's like a halachic thing when you have a consensus. Enough of them lean in this direction, and that is now what it is. The Rebbe Rashab says, I respectfully disagree. He has like a bunch of questions on this. Very interesting. Of course, some great Chabad Kabbalists will respond that after the Alter Rebbe, the Rashab asked these questions, he gave another alternate answer, which is, guess what? God wanted to make his dwelling place in the lowest realm, which is this world. That's the answer the Rashab gives, which, by the way, that's everything. That's the main teaching of the 7 Lubavitcher Rebbe became what? That. Right?
Can
Yeah.
Can you just give a summary of what you read? I couldn't follow.
Sure.
What was it? 'Cause you
So
were-
here, and I'll not only that, I'll do one better. I'll do that, and then I'll explain what the Rashab had, what issue he had with
Yeah.
it. So he says, look, the teaching that it's a little repetitive here, so you got it already probably, but is that until you actualize something, it's just in potential. So you're missing something by not having shown to be compassionate. You're called the compassionate God, but until you actually have something to be compassionate to, you're missing out. And every name of God indicates a relationship in which God actually does something in the world, but without making a world, he's deficient. the thing that the Rashab challenges is not true according to the Rashab. He says, Ein koach chasapol. Again, we're dealing with probably Greek level philosophy that I don't claim to understand. Like, if something exists in potential, it's not really missing the actual. The fact that it didn't actually happen is not a big deal. We're not worried about it. So that's one of his challenges. He has a number of challenges to this statement. And by the way, he's not just challenging the Ari. The Ari himself is saying, this is not my idea. He says they already talked about it and they already decided this is the answer. Okay. I'm just trying to show you that the Arizal, who we all say we all follow him, not really. We do, meaning if we're gonna explain why we're not really following him, we're gonna have to work really hard on explaining it. It's also an honor to say, I'm gonna disagree with the Arizal, but I'm gonna make it a very well thought out teaching, and then somebody's going to come afterwards and say, really, we can reconcile the two, because that's how we usually work. We don't want there to be dissonance between the Rashab of Shalom Ber of Lubavitch and the Arizal, so we'll reconcile them. That's not for today. Okay.
Can I just comment
Yes,
before
please.
we go to the next step, because
Yes,
I'm gonna
yes.
do
I'm going to put this close to you.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Just a commentary of Sefer Yain Arokah,
Okay.
Rabbi Yehuda Fdaim,
Okay.
and also Yefe Sha'ah,
Okay.
Rav Dweka Cohen. One of the
Sure.
Mekubalim.
Sure.
But the point here,
Yeah.
to explain and give a gahar,
Yeah.
when the Ari said, גזרו עומר, they already decide that לדעת סיבת בריאת העולמות, what is the סיבה? So we say, when we say the סיבה, we don't talking about מלמעלה למטה. Means what was in mind of God to do it. Say, from us, when we search for it,
Human perspective.
from human
That's
perspective,
what I wanted to say.
we are described now why the prophets that was from the beginning of the creation, from Yetzer Sefer Yetzirah, Raziel HaMalach, all this, when they given the Shem Havaya, Shem Elohim Tzevaot, all this is how is described to us. Because
From
we
our
are human
perspective,
beings,
no
we
matter
are
what.
limited, we have only Sechel Enoshi, and we cannot describe when we are in this jail of humanity. The only way we get what we got from there, we got the name, and now we try to find the definition. And what the Arizal said is for him it's obvious that we're talking from Klape us. After we got the prophecy, we try to analyze it. We try to find it out. But it's not in the mind of God, because no one can reach the mind of God.
By the way, Tony, this conversation really goes back to Greeks before they.
Yeah, it goes
Every major
back.
philosopher.
The Rishonim already start dealing with this question. So it's not, most of them say it's lehetiv. They like to say, which the Rashab also takes on, lehetiv, which is that God wants to do good with us. The ultimate goodness is to give us free choice, and so on and so forth. There are different answers. It's not the only answer. So anyway, so that's the beginning of the Arizal. But let's continue a little bit. I'll skip a little bit to Hachakira Beis, the second page, third paragraph on the right-hand side on the bottom of the second page. Because you're getting the drift of the first one. Hachakira Beis, Hikrova El Shar Lamala Maila Malamata. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate it almost word for word or concept for concept. That way, I won't confuse you as much. The second query is similar to the thing that the Talmud tells us not to do, which he's well aware of, which is to say what's above, what's below, what's before, what's after, like real deep questions of like, Like little kids will say, "Who created God?" Like, you're not allowed to say that. God, it wasn't created. That's the whole thing of God, is that he wasn't created. Unless you learn Zohar, Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning of creation, Shem Elokim, right? That's, but not what it sounds to the simple reader. Now, this is a Gemara Chagiga. The chapter is Ein Darshan. We don't teach this to people because it's what we call Ma'aseh Bereshit, Ma'aseh Merkava. And even in Ma'aseh Bereshit, Ma'aseh Merkava, there's certain things that the inquiries that you're not allowed to ask, like what's before.
And if I may add, his Mishnah will be making a siyum on Moed tomorrow night here, and I'll be talking about the Rambam's understanding of this Mishnah.
Beautiful. Okay, good. So, Dr. Stillman, you're right in the right sugya, so to speak. So it's mentioned by the rabbis regarding this Mishnah that if you look into these four things, you shouldn't have been created, so to speak. They're dangerous areas. What's above, what's below, what's before, what's after, and whoever doesn't give the right respect to the Creator, because you're looking in places you shouldn't look. So therefore, we have to limit the level of our inquiry, because we don't want to get into trouble here. But we'll say Rashi Prakim. Rashi Prakim is how they were able to teach with only limited, that you hinted to certain things. I remember there was a Rebbe who said, I don't understand. If you're only hinting, how is the person going to understand it? Because the thing is, because they understand it when their heart is pure. But if their heart isn't pure, you're just saying a few words. You're not really saying anything at all. Can make like looking between the lattice work, like peeking through a little hole in the wall, without really going to the true depth. But you'll still be able to understand it, with understanding. So here the matter is like this. This inquiry is, why did creation happen at this particular time? Not before or not after. That might be a way of reading what happened before, what happened after. It's like, well, why is it now? Which is the kosher way. Can't say why it's before, not allowed to say, but why is it now? So this is really a bigger question about the whole idea of time and space. What's the Kabbalistic version of time and space? So you should know something we're going to talk about in this compilation, that there is something above that has infinity, has no end. We call it Ein Sof, without end. That's the name of it. And the name shows you what it is, that there's no way to grasp it. There's no way to entertain a true description of its qualities. Not in the mind, not in thought whatsoever. It's completely transcending and above and beyond our thoughts. It precedes all that was emanated, all that which was created, all that which was formed, all that was made. A reference to the Atzilut, Bria, Yitzir, Asir. By the way, all of those words are really a simple translation of what will transpire once the world starts being emanated and formed and created, so to speak. But this precedes all of that. And that had no beginning. There's no start date on that. Because it's Tamid, Nimsa, V'Kaim Lad. It always was, and it always will be. Has no beginning, has no end. Now we could truly, if we wanted to, we could analyze every word here. But I want to just give you a little bit here. Now from the infinite Ein Sof, the one without end, it's also no beginning, will a chain of causality, of what we call cause and effect, that will happen out of that, afterwards. What we call the Ma'or HaGadol, the great light, The great light will be after that. What's the great light? Adam Kadmon. Adam means Adam. Kadmon means that which preceded, that which came before. And it's Adam Kadmon L'chol HaKadumin. It's the thing that's before everything else. It's not as high as Ein Sof. Ein Sof precedes Adam Kadmon, as we'll talk about in Anaf 3. And afterwards will become Nishtalshalu. The word Nishtalshalu comes from the word Shalshelet, which means a chain. Because a chain represents a link on top and a link on bottom. The link on top is holding that which comes before it, and the link on bottom is that which precedes that what will come out of it. And the Hishtalshalut is what we normally call, in general words, Ila va'alo. It's the spiritual cause and effect. We have the laws of physics in this world, right? The famous hitting the ball on the billboard and the bill. I already say what's the word for that? Billiard ball. And that the physics of that sets everything in motion. One ball hits another ball that hits another ball, cause and effect. So, what's the first ball, so to speak? It's Adam Kadmon. And who struck the ball? If you could even say that, the Ein Sof. But you can't even say that, so therefore we're going to come up with the Tzimtzum. Okay. So that's...
But we do know, but we do have a physical reality in the eternity, because that's what Einstein's theory proves. It's his time goes back and forth, and the black hole is eternity. And you know what's very possible? And for instance, whatever it means, pre-Adam. In the Moreh Elohim, it's obvious that the Rambam doesn't hold that Adam's the first person who walked on 2 feet, so there's a reality beyond, before that, whatever that means. But the fact of the matter is...
No, Hashem created many, many worlds before that. It didn't work out.
Let him finish.
But what happens is that as we learn, whatever gives us the ability to learn, that God lets us know. The fact is, science actually shows that, in fact, many of these thoughts, these are brilliant men, geniuses, Siatish, whatever you want to call it, who could not put in words the scientific, because it was, you can only be informed what you know. You can't. The fact of the matter, science is showing to us that many things may be true, but there is a basis for it beyond just beyond the thought. The fact of the matter is, there is infinity. In the physical world, what that means for us in terms of life, don't get Einstein back. But the fact is, the reality is, obviously he's right. You didn't get to the moon, and you don't do all this without his theories. So the fact of the matter is that there is an infinity. But how are they going to express that in a time before you do this science? They expressed it in brilliant ways, but so did Plato and Socrates.
Okay. So we're going to get to that. So that's a good question.
Just the reality.
So I just, Peter, could you get some cookies and pass them out so everybody can continue eating?
Let's get some cookies so I can be juiced up.
Yeah. So now we're going to turn.
It's not being, I'm not being, usually you and I would be wiser.
Yeah.
Did my manager say he can also prove that people have the existence of God, that God did exist?
Okay, now I'm going to skip to the bottom of that page. Well, I'm going to get, by the way, hold the thought, because number 6 is science. We're still up to number 4.
Can you just explain what is Adam Kadmon?
Adam Kadmon is when it says Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu, let's make Adam in our image. Who's the image there? It's Adam Kadmon. There's the image of the original Adam, which also doesn't have an image, but it's the idea of we're going to create based on a spiritual construct that exists before anything else exists. Now, it doesn't exist before Ein Sof, but Ein Sof's existence is a different type of existence. So I'm going to skip to the last 3 lines of this page, and he's going to answer the question of why God created the world now, not before or after. But basically he explains that from Adam Kadmon is the beginning of the chain of causality. From that he'll create the world about Kodim and the Kodim, Rudim, Tohu, Tikkun, Atzilut, Bria, Yitzir, Asiyah. He's going to create a whole chain that we were talking about, Ila Ba'alo. the pinball, not the pinballs, billiard balls, of creation is beginning to be set in motion. And we're going to learn more about that. But from that period onward, where the spread of the worlds would happen and descend from a higher world to a lower world that would eventually manifest in creation of the physical universe, one after the other, till things actualized in physical reality. Next page. That we are in now. And then according to the way that things spread and in this chain of causality, of cause and effect, what we call not just time, but Seder Zmanim, the potential setup for time. Like what would, in science, the equivalent would be the early phase right after the Big Bang, so to speak, where time as we know it may not have had all of the same, that like millisecond after the Big Bang. Did time exist in the same way? It did, but it was called Seder Zmanim, the potential for time. So that's just a metaphor for this. That happened when it happened. It doesn't go backwards. You only go forward, so to speak. That's what he's saying. It happened because it happened then and not before. It's not possible to make it earlier because the stage 1 had to happen before stage 2. That would then cause stage 3. Or for it to be later. Because each world is created, so it had to be, the process had to start. So until that process starting, nothing would be.
Rabbi, there's a
Yeah.
that Ma and Ben combined Gematria of 97, which is the same as the month, which is time. So it started after the vessels crashed, but then as part of the fixing.
Beautiful. Okay, good. So he says that's the answer. The answer is it started now because that's when it started. It's not really an answer. But before that, nothing existed for there to be. In other words, we have to understand that existence came into being. It wasn't already here. It's a process started, and it couldn't have started before it started because it didn't start yet. Now, the Baal Shem Tov re-asked this question. He doesn't take this as a full answer. So there's a beautiful Baal Shem Tov teaching that repeats this question and gives us a somewhat different answer. Now, Anaf Beis is the most famous part. This is what the Arizal is mostly mentioned in the context of the next teaching. Be'inyan Ein Sof Baruch Hu. We now call Or Ein Sof. That the infinite light, how was that the beginning of Atzilut Olamot, the emanation of the worlds? Now, what's just to give you another word for Atzilut, is when Moshe was having the struggle with trying to share his knowledge with the 70 elders. It doesn't just use the word transmit teachings to teach. It says, V'ya'atzel min haruach. You're going to give over some of your spirit. You're the source of whatever it is to be Moshe Rabbeinu, and you're going to share you're going to transfer something that's not just information. It's not just words. It's spirit. It's an inner quality that you have. You're going to put it on them. So, Kaviyachal, obviously God is infinitely greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. He's not a human being. But the idea of Atzilut is God radiating something from His infiniteness into something a little more finite, but it shares some quality, even if it's not the same, but it's similar. Okay, so that's a part of how we should understand the word of Atzilut, God emanating something.
Is that an overflow? Is that a spread?
So we're going to use the word light. Yeah, hold the thought because we're about to get to Tzimtzum. So he says before that, what?
It could be like a fire. Fire doesn't
all of these things, the fire passes from one thing to another, right? I could light something else on fire, but fire is a very substantive thing, so the Kabbalists like the word light. They don't mean it physically, it's a metaphor. All of these things are metaphors, when we use billiard balls and fire and even Moshe Rabbeinu, they're all metaphors.
Energy.
Now, first of all, he says you should know, there are those who say, this is reminiscent of the Pardes Rimonim. Question, some Kabbalists say that the sefirot are circular. And other Kabbalists say the sefirot are linear. Or if not in one line, like a train line, but more like a train line that has 3 lines. And maybe then a line that crosses between the 3 lines. Okay, so which one is it? And in Kabbalah, there's a principle that we don't like to say that there's a machlokes, that there's a division, a debate, and Kabbalists don't agree. So instead we say, Elu ve'elu dir Elokim Chayim, both are true, both are the words of the living God. There is a stage in which what we're going to call igulim. Igulim is like when you have a Russian doll, a nesting doll, where you open it up, and what's in it? Another doll. And you open it up, and what's in it? Another doll. And you open it up, and what's in it? Another doll. Until you get to the smallest doll. And who's the smallest doll, the Arizal says? Us. The physical world is at the center, and the lowest, the furthest away. Now, the original doll is the closest to the Ein Sof, the biggest doll. And the littlest doll that's the furthest away from the Ein Sof is at the center. So that's us. We always want to be the center, but at the other hand, we're far away from the Ein Sof.
Can we say that when we said the word metaphor?
Yeah.
So this metaphor this way, this metaphor this way.
Yeah, both
Different metaphor. You can bring to the same thing
different perspectives from the different metaphors. Yeah.
This one see igulim. And this one says rikavim, and this one say describe it one after another.
Yeah. So, but rather than saying now, before that there was a machlokes. He said, "No machlokes. They're both true." Why? How could it be? So,
Different metaphor.
what's the difference between a line and a circle? So, a line usually represents, like, for example, time. Time is an arrow. It goes in a specific direction. Or even movement, right? The train, I brought up, like a train line, it could go back and forth. You don't have to only go one way in a train. You could then now, before it's going uptown, now it's going to go downtown, on the same track. Dangerous, you don't want a collision, but you could in theory do it if you have the right switches and signals and so on. Movement, circle, if you go in a circle, where do you end up? It's nice for a walk, for exercise, but you don't get anywhere because you end up right where you started. But what's circular, for example?
Life, cycle of life.
The sun and the moon are going, and the earth, they're all on circular orbits. So what it does is, even though we say time is linear, but it all comes back. The season reappears, the holiday reappears. Choser v'niyar, we say the whole idea of a holiday is that whatever energy was released, this is the Arizal. If God put in a certain manifestation that allowed us to go free out of Egypt on Pesach, that happens every year. It manifested in history on the year, whatever year they left Egypt. But every year it reappears. Why? Because there's a circular, we're going forward, but it's also in a circle at the same time. So
Spiral.
it's a spiral. So a lot of theories of time in the ancient world were circular spiral, including ours to some degree. Now comes the Arizal and says the following. The question is, I'm going to skip out over the conversation of Igul and B'Yosher. He'll come back to that. And go to Daled, next page, top of next page. Now, by the way, there's a singer. He has my first name, Naftali Kempe. I don't know who composed the song, but he sets the next paragraph to music. If you can listen to it, it's very beautiful. Okay, I'm going to read it to you. This I have to read to you in Hebrew because it's very poetic. I'm going to read the whole thing in Hebrew and then I'm going to translate it. Daled. Da kiterem shnetzlu. It's the next page after. Yeah. Anaf Beis, and then page 2 of Anaf Beis. Chav Zayin on top. It says, Da kiterem shnetzlu hanetzalim b'nivru hanivraim haya or elyon pashut memala kol hametziyut. Lo haya shum makom panoi b'bechinas avir rekani v'chalal. El hakol haya memula min ha'or in sof pashut hahu. Lo haya lo b'chinat rosh, lo b'chinat sof. El hakol haya or echad pashut shava b'hashava achat. V'hanika or ein sof. V'chasher Allah b'yitzono ha'pashut. Livro ha'olamot, l'hatzil ha'netza'alim, l'hotzi la'or shlemut pu'lotav v'shemotav v'kinuyav. Asher zot hi sibat b'riyat ha'olamot, k'mavur etzlenu b'naf ha'alef, b'chakir ha'rishona, v'hine az. Tzimtzum es atzmo ein sof b'nekuda ha'emtza'it, asher bo, be'emsa oro mamish, v'tzimtzam ha'or hahu, v'nisrachek al tzadei svivot ha'nekuda ha'emtza'it, v'az nishar makam panoi v'avir v'chalal rekani, minekuda ha'emtza'it mamash kazeh. Circle with a dot in the middle. V'hine ha'tzimtzum hazeh haya b'hashava achat b'svivot ha'nekuda ha'emtza'it rekanit hahu, v'ofen sheb'makam ha'chalal hahu, היה עגול מכל סביבותיו בהשבה גמורה, והיה בתמונה מרובה בעל זוויות ניצבות, לפי שגם אין סוף צמצם עצמו מבחינת עיגול, בהשבה אחת מכל צדדים. והסיבה הייתה לפי שכיוון שאור אין סוף שווה בהשבה גמורה, והוכח גם כן שיצמצם עצמו בהשבה אחת מכל הצדדים. Now, this is the famous
Question.
Tzimtzum. Yeah.
How are you understanding the difference between Ein Sof and Or Ein Sof?
They're the same. They're the same here. Look, later there's going to be people who are going to be right about there's atzmut. He doesn't use the word so much atzmut.
Yeah.
There's going to be conversations later. The Rashab of Chabad that we talked about says Ein Sof and atzmut are usually the same. But really, if it was the same, it wouldn't even be called R. Because R means light. Atzmut is essence. Essence is beyond even light. So he starts trying to create some fine distinctions. He says that even though the Or Ein Sof has no beginning, but it's Atzmut. That's the essence. The fact that we call it Ein Sof it's because Ein Sof is part of Atzmut. It's the manifestation of Atzmut. That's a Chabad thing. It's not clear that other people have that distinction. So, same thing with Ein Sof and Or Ein Sof, same question. But let's read it inside. For example, here there's a famous Kabbalistic Menachem Rekanti. On the one side, I'm forgetting the name of the other Mukubal on the other side, had a disagreement of if the Tzimtzum is Kipshuto, if it actually was a Tzimtzum, or if it's a metaphor. And then you're going to have that with, they say the Vilna Gaon, because he was a commentary on one of these Mukubalim, and the Baal Shem Tov, going to continue this argument, or the Balatanya. So know that before the emanated world was emanated, Netzlu Netzalim, and the world was created, because these are stages in creation, there was a simple light. So here I'm going to say Or and Ein Sof are the same. The light that he's referring to as Or Elyon Pashut is Ein Sof. It's the same thing. And now the word Pashut is reminiscent of Maimonides, and before him, already in Platonic times, they had this idea that you can't have different attributes in the essence of the divine because that would create division, multiple.
Remember,
Yeah.
You can't be a
Multiple.
God and have you can't be a God and have anything. It's not
Yeah.
separate. It is. what it
So,
is.
so I always like to say Kabbalah believes in the same God that transcends all divisions, but that's not the part we're more interested in because we can't really talk about that. There's nothing to talk about. It is what it is, you know. But we're more interested in the sefirot because we could have a conversation about that. So that permeated all that there was, and because it permeated all that there was no. What he's not saying here, but he says in other places, is that there would be no room for anything else to exist in that light, in the presence of that light. And there was no empty space. There was no avire kani. There was no hollowed out place. Everything was permeated by that infinite light that was in this simple, unadulterated form. There was no head. There's no end. It's all the same. Pashut, shava b'shavachas. He repeats himself 3 or 4 times. Again, you could probably say he's talking about in the level of mochen, and the level of midot, and the level of malchut, and each, what would become, let's say, a partsuf later, like a structure, a persona of the divine sefirot. In any of those stages, there's no headers that on the simple reading of the Ari, those things don't exist at all. Later on, the question will be, do they exist in potential? Are the sefirot in the Orient self in potential? Many people say, no, that's the Ramak, not the Ari. Chabad will argue. Chabad will go with the Ramak. Again, like I said, the Ramak isn't done. He's not finished. Now, when it came time, B'Ritzona HaPashut, in God's mind. Now, that's a contradiction in terms. How could it be Kasher Allah B'Ritzona HaPashut? If God doesn't have any will, because that's an attribute, how could it be awakened in His will to want? Understand the question? This is a big question. Because every time there's a shift from, how do we get from A to B here? You know, how do we get from one that is simple, that there's no division, there's no attributes, to say that, but I kind of want something now. It's a question. So some people have the answers. You know what? It's a good question, but
You have to throw in kaviyachol.
yeah,
As it
we
were.
understand
what?
that God
Yeah,
is not the end source.
yeah.
The end source also
Yeah.
is pure.
Well, that's what we're just talking about, right?
So
Is,
that's why we're
can you
talking-
say that or not?
We're talking ratzon, and you have ratzon haratzonot. That this is the highest that we can reach. But he said before, אל תחקור למעלה מזה. He said, more than the end sof, you cannot
So
reach.
you're going to have to say something like the Chazan is saying, meaning you have to say, I've seen answers saying, Kisha'Allah b'Ritzono is, of course, it's not in the Ratzon, in the level which is not able to have Ratzon. So whatever level that is, but the question still is there.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Not the level of
Yeah.
the place that you cannot be understand or even talk about.
Yeah. Okay. So now you have to answer something like that.
This only
Yeah.
could be related in our understanding of relationship. It can't have to be about God. You can't have any explanation that deals with whatever that means God. We say eternal. That's
So
like
the-
those
so-
who created everything.
Yeah.
So everything is a creation.
So-
If
so
that's
you'll-
a creation, or if it can't.
Yeah.
Therefore,
I
it's
hear
only
you.
our relationship to that concept.
Okay, so
It's
you're
not
saying a
about
similar
God.
thing. You're saying a similar thing. You say he's coming around. He's coming around.
I always say this to you. What is that? Not coming around. This is and by the way, he's coming with all due respect.
No, but the Kabbalists say this. What I'm saying is the Kabbalists know this. They're not ignorant of these
course they know
things.
it, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fact is, these are concepts are not from the time of the 15, 12.
No, these things have been around a long time. They go back to Plato. A lot of
Oh,
them.
he's saying the Zohar goes back to Rosh
Well, this question of if God's indivisible.
Probably not. No, that's not what he's saying.
The
What?
question is about if God is indivisible, how could he have this desire?
Yeah.
It came up in that Moshe Halbertal book about humanity's,
Same
like
thing.
idea of
That
perfection.
they have in common. The question is still, even though they have different outlooks of how to answer the question, but the question is still there in both systems. Yeah. So that's a good question, and there's different answers but the question remains. So you have to come up with an answer to answer
So you're
what.
saying that there's a, so to speak, a level above Ein Sof.
Well, that's what it's saying. In Chabad,
Yeah,
they answer the question they have two-pronged answer. One is saying Ein Sof has a potential sefirot. Ein Sof is not atzmut mahut. You can't say it's separate, but it's not the same, but it's not separate. They come up with these very subtle distinctions, and then they have a weird answer for how they answer this question. That it's not because God had any lack in any way. That's why they argue. Instead, they say a Yiddish answer: "Ifatayva effect menishkin kashas." Which is a weird answer, which means when a person has a certain urge, interest in something that's not rational, you can't ask why do they want it. That's what they want, which is a weird thing to say about our Ein Sof.
Yeah. No, but it's like saying, you can't explain why you want vanilla instead of chocolate. Right?
That's just what you want. You have a preference of you want. Why do I want a bagel and not a rice cracker? I don't know. Rice crackers are awful, but so this is what it is. Anyway, let's quickly talk about customs because we don't really have much time. But what I wanted to say, I gave this lecture in Boston a number of years ago about customs based on the Ari. And there's a tremendous amount, and that was just the beginning. Afterwards, I saw more and more and more things brought down. Let's say you have the Kaf HaChaim, he's a Sephardic halachic authority. He brings down hundreds of customs based on the Arizal. So what they say is that the Arizal, there was already many, many customs in the Zohar, for example. But that doesn't mean that just because it was in the Zohar, the Arizal accepted it. He decided which customs to keep from the Zohar and which customs should not be kept just because they're in the Zohar. So he was the moderator for these things. And his students took notes, and those or practice his practice, and those notes and those practices made their way into many different sources of halacha in almost every Jewish community. Not all, but almost every Jewish community, some more than others. So, for example, the Chabad customs are very influenced by the Arizal's customs. Not always, but often. I can't overstate how big his influence is in the matter of customs. Besides the fact that Tikkun Lil Shavuos or Hakafas, the way we have them now, those are some of the more famous ones, are based on his. Again, he wasn't the only one talking about these things, but he was the decisor. His say became what we practice. Okay, so many, many things. And number 6 is science and Kabbalah. What I did is, I actually just bought this book, and to be honest with you, I don't understand it because you have to be, physics would pass it around. But I'm not going to say I understand it, but there's a theory in physics, in science, called information. What?
Information theory.
Information theory, which I don't understand it, but it gives a lot of credence to the way something is understood. Is basically. It's just not it isn't just that there's a material existence and then we go back and try to figure out what it is. It's like figuring out what something is what the thing actually is. I may be not explaining it correctly. It's new for me. It's just this from yesterday. But he basically rereads this information theory into the Arizal. He's not his Kabbalah knowledge is limited to really understanding the Arizal through the Alter Rebbe. He quotes everything the Alter Rebbe this from Torah Likutei Torah. It's all quotes of the Arizal. He basically doesn't have access to the Arizal directly, at least when he wrote it, or wasn't fluent in it. But he's fluent in Likutei Torah and Torah of the Alter Rebbe, and he quotes them, quoting the Arizal or explaining the Arizal. But it's an interesting book. I enjoyed it. I didn't understand it, but there's another book. There's probably a dozen books, maybe more, that like to use Kabbalah in general and the Arizal in particular to interpret physics, quantum physics. And there's another book by an astrophysicist from Santa Cruz. I used to live in Santa Cruz. I have this book by, I'm forgetting their name, but they use this Tzimtzum to describe what happened before the Big Bang. And these are serious scientists, and they're saying it's not that we believe that the Arizal was a scientist per se, but we're like his words like capture something, and they just like it. They use it. Okay, there's a lot there. I'm not a scientist, and I don't have any time. And 7 is psychology and Kabbalah. I'll just say that this Shabbos, the Dvar Torah I gave was based on the Arizal. The Arizal has so many ways of restating similar things in different contexts. So, for example, he restates some of the teachings that we learn about the Olamot in context of the mitzvot, the minhagim, of how the kavanot hatfilah, the kavanot of the mitzvot, are really a restatement of those ideas in how we actually can have those intentions when we do a mitzvah. Psychology is no different. Relationships, if we could understand and mine the Arizal's Kabbalah and apply them to relationships between children and parents, between husbands and wives, there's a lot there. There's a beautiful a lot of there. We just did the Torah about the 7 kings that we call the 7 kings of Olam HaTohu, which are the 7 attributes. But one of the things we learn in the Parsha of Devarim is that the 3 kingships of Sichon, is not Sichon and Og, is it Edom and Ammon and Moab represent the Keni, Kenizi, and Kadmoni, which is Keter, Chachma, and Bina of Olam HaTohu. They didn't have the higher levels of the world of chaos. The world of chaos is a spiritual world. That the Arizal,
this world.
the shards of it fell into this world, right? So the higher 3 levels didn't have the shvira. They had a yerida. They were lowered, but they didn't have a breaking, so to speak. So again, these are things that we can apply in psychology to tohu, to why people are attracted to destructive patterns, for example, of things that will bring them down, that don't make any sense. Because we're not purely rational, because we have the shards of Olam HaTohu in this world, including in us. Anyway, so that's a lot. There's a lot there. And I'm going to conclude now with blessing for the Stillman family, and what a zchut you have that your mother's yahrzeit is going to be remembered on this day, and also to separate from those who are no longer here to those who are here, that you have a son who dedicated his PhD to the writings of the Arizal. Right? So there's a connection there.
More than just his dissertation.
More than just his dissertation, his life, yeah.
What the zchut that she had, that you bring, that we have you to describe the day of the Ari HaKadosh, to open our mind.
Thank you.
With his Torah.
Thank you very much.
It's so beautiful.
And also, it's no coincidence, David Newton's birthday is today. So
Happy birthday.
no coincidence there. So it's a...
The Svi Padeh's book is also on the Eitz. I don't know whether it's still in print or not.
You could probably
It's
get
English,
it.
English translation of it.
yeah.
It's something wonderful.
Yeah. It's important to read the Arizal in its original, if not the Hebrew, at least the English. So, I know David, you like this book as well, right? This is very nice to read on the Parsha, Apples of the Orchard. So there are, Tzvi's book, this book. There's more and more coming out.
So in the spirit of the Hemshech,
Yeah.
so next year, you're going to assume everybody remembers what you said today.
Continue.
And we'll continue and do something
And next year, I'm bringing
else.
where your son is going to
7
speak.
months.
So.
We're going to do 7 months on this.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to hear your Avinoam's stuff on this. And
But this was an outstanding
thank you.
introduction in such limited time.
Yeah.
It was a
it
beautiful
was limited.
survey.
It was limited,
Survey.
especially by my lack of knowledge.
I'll take the liberty. We can say a Kaddish Derabona.
Yeah, Kaddish Derabona.
Excellent.
Wait.
Yeah.